Good evening, and welcome to another fascinating, fun-filled episode of the Prince Hall Think Tank. My name is James R. Morgan III, and tonight I'm joined by, you guessed it, none other than Brother Dave Gillarm, Brother Damian Jack, our leader, our fearless leader, Brother Antonio Caffey, is handling some business tonight, but you got us, and we have a very special guest for you all tonight, and Brother Larry Gibson, who will be explaining to us the wonderful fascinating life story of the great and honorable brother that was Thurgood Marshall. This man was a pioneer for civil rights. He was also the first African American to serve on the United States Supreme Court. And quiet as kept, he was very, very active in Prince Hall Freemasonry. And so tonight, Brother Gibson is going to tell us about how both of those interests of his, civil rights and Freemasonry, how they went hand in hand, although many have not yet known that fact. But before we get into that, let's do some introductions. As you all know, my name is James R. Morgan III. I'm a past master of Corinthian Lodge number 18, which operates under the auspices of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, where the Honorable Anthony B. Corbett is presiding as our most worshipful Grand Master. I also have the pleasure and honor of serving as the worshipful Grand Historian for our jurisdiction, and I'm so honored to be here. I'm going to kick it on down to my good friend down in Georgia, Brother Dave Gillarm.
All right, thank you. It's always great to be back with everybody. Once again, Brother Dave Gillarm Jr. I'm a proud past master of the Mount Pisgah Lodge number 53, located in Columbus, Georgia, where Brandon Dura serves as our worshipful master. I also have the pleasure of serving as the worshipful Grand Historian for the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia, where the Honorable Corey D. Shackelford Sr. serves as our 18th worshipful Grand Master. I heard while I was gone there was some Knicks hate, but in my journeys away from you all, I had to gather up some trinkets, and I was able to gather a Walt Frazier.
Oh my
God! Knicks Christmas ornament. So I had to start off the show with a bang already. The Christmas ornament will be right beside me during this show. All right, so I'll go ahead and pass it on to Brother Damian Jack.
I swear, Brother Gillarm, many years from now, this will be a Dave Gillarm Museum of Knicks memorabilia, I swear. Brother Jack.
I need that from my mom. Make sure I get one of those. Good evening, everyone. Brother Damian Jack, proud past master of Paul Dre and Lodge number 7. Here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Brother Sean Moy serves as our worshipful master. Our lodge is a constituent lodge under the auspices of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of North Carolina, where the Honorable Daniel L. D.T. Thompson serves as our 24th most worshipful Grand Master. As always, it's an honor and pleasure to be before you this evening, and looking forward to discussing this great topic of an honorable brother and honorable double brother for me, which is why I'm rocking the shirt this evening. Honorable Thurgood Marshall. So looking forward to the show this evening.
Magnificent. And before I introduce our guest, let me make sure to mention to you all that the views and opinions expressed here on the Prince Hall Think Tank do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the Masonic lodges, Grand Lodges, and other organizations that we hold membership in. This is a discussion among friends and brothers who are trying to spread light and scholarship about the history of our wonderful organization. And with that being said, let me introduce to you all, reintroduce and present to others, someone who's become a good friend and I like to think of as a mentor of mine as well, and Brother Larry S. Gibson. Brother Gibson's resume, both Masonically and outside the walls of the lodge, is one that is very long, very illustrious. And so I'm going to read this off to you all so you all can understand the dynamic and history-making individual that we have here before us this evening. Brother Larry S. Gibson grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and attended the Howard University, where he was the student government president and chairman of the D.C. Students for Civil Rights. In 1967, he earned his law degree from Columbia University in New York City. In 1972, Brother Gibson began teaching at the University of Virginia School of Law. 2 years later, he then transferred to the University of Maryland School of Law, where he is the Morton and Sophia Macht Professor of Law and teaches election law and seminars about race and the law. Brother Gibson has also taught as a visiting law professor at the University of Mississippi, the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. This brother's international, all right? And North Carolina Central University. I think Brother Jack might know a little something about that institution, and so do the brothers and sisters of that jurisdiction. He holds an honorary doctorate degree from the Morgan State University. I got to shout out my new school. Brother Gibson is of counsel to the Baltimore law firm Shapiro, Scher, and Guineau and Sandler. He has visited more than 70 countries in the world practicing law and speaking and teaching. Professor Gibson has researched and designed several exhibits, articles, newspaper series, and other presentations on the history of civil rights and African American lawyers. Professor Gibson was the principal advocate for the law that was passed here in the state of Maryland by the Maryland General Assembly that renamed the what's now BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport. All right. And I'm actually, for those who don't know, I'm actually flying out to Oklahoma this week from BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport. This is the brother who got that airport renamed for Thurgood Marshall. His book, Young Thurgood, The Making of a Supreme Court Justice, that describes the environment, the people, and events that shaped the young Thurgood Marshall, his attitudes, work habits, and priorities in his formative years, and has won the 2013 International Book Award for Biography. Brother Gibson has served on the Board of Trustees of the Maryland Historical Trust, the Baltimore City Commission for Historical and Architectural Preservation, and the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. During the administration of President Jimmy Carter, Brother Gibson served as the United States Department of Justice as the Associate Deputy Attorney General and as the Director of the National Economic Crimes Project. He was also the Vice Chair of the National Security Council's Working Group on Terrorism. Brother Gibson is a proud member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated and an Archon of Sigma Pi Phi. He's also a Sovereign Grand Inspector General of the 33rd degree and serves as the Right Worshipful Grand Legal Advisor of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the state of Maryland. Brothers and sisters all, please give a Prince Hall Think Tank welcome to Brother Larry Gibson. Brother Gibson, how are you feeling this evening?
I'm doing fine.
Magnificent.
Let me first mention that I am a member of King David 18 Lodge, where Brother Roland Shelby is the Worshipful Master, which is in Baltimore, under the jurisdiction of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Maryland, the Honorable Noel C. Osborne Sr., Most Worshipful Grand Master. It's my pleasure to discuss with you today a very special Mason, our brother Thurgood Marshall. Many legal historians say that Thurgood Marshall was the most important American lawyer of the 20th century. Now, that's saying a lot. I mean, I know how much that is saying because I've been teaching people to be lawyers for 50 years. But you know, that claim about Thurgood Marshall just might be right. He certainly had a dramatic and a lasting impact on our nation and on its law, particularly its constitutional law. And I can't think of another lawyer who has had a greater impact. Let's review briefly the record. From 1938 to 1961, Thurgood Marshall was the lead attorney for the NAACP. In that capacity, and as director of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, he handled landmark civil rights cases all over the nation. He also handled them not just in the federal courts, but in the state courts, the trial courts, and the appellate courts. He argued 31 cases before the United States Supreme Court, winning 27 of those. Now, of course, his most famous victory was the 1954 United States Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education that outlawed racial segregation in public schools. That decision also began the process of unraveling all governmentally supported racial segregation. Thurgood Marshall's work changed American law and American conduct, not only in education, but also in housing, in criminal justice, environment, transportation, public accommodations, and of course, voting rights. In fact, Thurgood Marshall regarded his most important work not to be the school cases, but instead the voting rights cases, which he began 10 years before Brown versus Board of Education, began in 1944. In 1961, Thurgood Marshall left the NAACP when President John F. Kennedy appointed him to be a federal judge, a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, which sits in New York City. On that court, Judge Marshall, wrote more than 100 majority opinions, and not a single one of his decisions was ever reversed by the United States Supreme Court. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson appointed Thurgood Marshall to be the Solicitor General of the United States. In that position, he was the top litigator for the United States government. He argued another 18 cases before the United States Supreme Court, winning 15 of those. Marshall was delighted that one of those cases that he got to argue and won was that the case that defended the constitutionality of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In 1967, President Lyndon Johnson named Marshall to the United States Supreme Court, where he served for 24 years. So I guess when you put that all together, we can see that he probably was the most important American lawyer of the 20th century. And he made contributions that forced this nation to live more up to its creed of equal justice under law. But he didn't do this alone. He had help. He had help from a variety of sources. And one of his most reliable and consequential sources of help was our fraternity, the Prince Hall Masons and its affiliated organizations. The craft was instrumental to Thurgood Marshall's work in several ways. First, in every case that Marshall handled in a state around the nation, he worked with at least one co-counsel, a local attorney who was a member of the bar of that state. Marshall had great admiration for the competence and the courage of these lawyers who worked and lived often under constant threat of harm. In most of the states of the South, that co-counsel was a Prince Hall Mason. For example, Thurgood Marshall's co-counsel in Alabama was A.D. Shore. And have we begun showing my, are we now sharing? Fine, great. Was A.D. Shore. Shore's was a courageous man and a really good a lawyer. His home, where Thurgood Marshall stayed when he was in Birmingham, was bombed twice. See, I got Birmingham spelled wrong. The bomb moved around my letters, but that didn't deter him at all. The Thurgood Marshall of Tennessee was Z. Alexander Lubin, a brilliant lawyer, a Yale Law graduate. He worked with Marshall from one end of that wide state of Tennessee to the other. Lubin's home, where Marshall stayed, was also bombed and damaged by dynamite. Luby actually rescued Thurgood Marshall from the closest that he came to being lynched. In South Carolina, Thurgood Marshall's local co-counsel was Harold Bulwer, a Prince Hall Mason. Bulwer worked with Thurgood on several cases, including the Clarendon County school case. That was one of those 5 cases that made up what we call a Brown versus a Board of Education. In addition to providing lawyers throughout the South, Prince Hall lodges provided Thurgood Marshall with transportation assistance, security assistance. They literally moved him some places from one house to another in a town for his safety. They met his trains when he came to town or went out to the airport to retrieve him. That's a big contribution made by Masons all over the South. Thurgood Marshall's work was also benefited by the Masonic buildings and temples. In addition to being places where he could hold meetings, big and small, these buildings were often the places where the lawyers were housed, or they housed the civil rights organizations. For example, this Birmingham building. This was the Birmingham Masonic building. That lawyer, Arthur Shores, his office was in that building, as was the NAACP and the Urban League. When it got time to print a flyer to announce a meeting or somehow get the word out, often the Masonic building in town was the most reliable place to get that done, such as here, the Masonic building in Atlanta, Georgia, the Masonic building in Columbus, Georgia. These edifices all over the South were really important. Often they had clerical help that Thurgood Marshall needed. But the most dramatic assistance the Prince Hall Masons provided to Thurgood Marshall's work was money, and lots of it. As Thurgood Marshall moved around from one place to the other, funds were needed for train and airline tickets, lodging, food, court fees, transcripts, secretarial services, a wide range of expenses. The Prince Hall Masons not only gave directly to the NAACP and encouraged the individual members to get memberships in the NAACP, but at Marshall's request, they also set up and funded a separate legal research operation under his control. It was called the Prince Hall Masons Legal Research Bureau, NAACP. And under Marshall's control, this organization raise additional money to what Thurgood Marshall otherwise would have to operate. He was able to hire a specialized staff of secretarial staff and researchers. And much of the legal work that went into the briefs associated with the Brown versus Board of Education decisions was funded was done by this staff, funded by the Prince Hall Masons. I am at the moment still documenting the precise figure and converting it to present day dollars, confirming the amounts and the such. So I will release the figures in my next book, which will be published later this year or early next year. At that time, I'll spell out the precise amounts. But let me say this much, that I can already document that, counting in present day value, that the figure will be over $1 million in present day, direct funding to Thurgood Marshall's work from Prince Hall Masons. No other organization or groups of organization came close. Keep in mind that most of this was coming from working class people and hundreds of individual lodges all over the South. The states, almost all of them. Oh, that's the wrong slide from that. Let me just let me talk a little bit about how this got going. When I was writing my first book, I would see these checks being given to Thurgood by various Masonic groups and all, but the first book was covering his early years, and so I would just note it, but keep on going. And frankly, I assumed that Thurgood Marshall's involvement with the Masonic organizations and all grew out of his contact in Baltimore, because the Grand Master there in Baltimore was Willard Allen. He became a president of the Conference of Grand Masters, high ranking in the Scottish Rite. So I assumed that that's what it was. It was not that at all. It really began right with what is indicated on this picture in Oklahoma. I understand that, Brother Morgan, you're about ready to go there. This was in 1948. It was a busy year for Marshall and for the NAACP. I think Thurgood had 4 arguments before the Supreme Court in 1948. These litigations were expensive. And the NAACP and the Legal Defense Fund were really operating on a shoestring. Worse than that, by then they were basically in critical financial condition, almost flat broke. Thurgood's co-counsel in that case had a solution. His co-counsel is the man on the left of this photograph, Amos Hall. Amos Hall was a very prominent lawyer in Oklahoma, based in Tulsa. But he was more widely known as the Grand Master of the Prince Hall Masons of the state of Oklahoma. And had been that for some time, and would be over a period of, I think, maybe 30 years. Hall told Thurgood, if you become a Mason, I think we can help with this financial condition. So he encouraged Thurgood to join the Masons, and he also encouraged a man named Stewart, who was the head of the NAACP in Oklahoma. They both joined the Masons. I mean, Hall told Thurgood, Masons help Masons. So in 1948, Thurgood Marshall became a Mason affiliated with Coal Creek Lodge number 88 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And true to his word, Amos Hall began to facilitate Masonic support for Thurgood Marshall. And then something dramatically happened. a year and a half later, Hall became not only the Grand Master of Oklahoma, he became the president of the Conference of Grand Masters. He ultimately held that position for several years. And it is from that position that he was able to open doors for Thurgood Marshall throughout the South, particularly the southern jurisdiction. And over time, the Prince Hall Masons became Thurgood Marshall's principal support of support. These are some of the photos. This is actually is a Shriner group, one lodge after another. Texas, South Carolina, Georgia, and we're talking about a lot of money. This is another Shriner group. This is an interesting photograph because it's the person giving the check is the Grand Master of Georgia, John Wesley Dobbs. They developed a competition between Dobbs in Georgia and John Lewis in Louisiana as to which Grand Lodge would give on a given year the most money. And it was throughout this period of time, one or the other. This photograph, taken in 1955, is Dobbs giving Thurgood Marshall a check just for 1955 of $6,500. I just recently used a calculator for the present day value of $68,000. That's just out of one state. As I said, he and Lewis in Louisiana would compete with each other. Sometimes they'd give their money separate. Sometimes they would show up together. This is John Lewis, the Grand Master of Louisiana, and Dobbs of Georgia. As I said, I'm still calculating the money, but we are up to at least present day value. I'm confident of it being more than $3 million. Now, Thurgood, we've said repeatedly that this was just absolutely essential to his success. Here's one quote of Thurgood Marshall. Whenever and wherever I needed money and did not know of any other place to get it, the Prince Hall Masons never let me down. This is in 1958, but we're talking about many more thousands of dollars even after that. He was absolutely appreciative of and acknowledged the crucial support in so many ways that he got from the Prince Hall Masons. But I must say it was not a one-way street. He not only appreciated, but he engaged with his masonry. Thurgood Marshall was not a joiner. I find very little affiliation with him with organizations, but he maintained his affiliation with the Cold Creek Lodge throughout his career. Even after he became a judge, he would go back to various meetings and communications at his lodge in Oklahoma. Even after he became on the Supreme Court as a justice of the Supreme Court, Thurgood Marshall would periodically go back to his lodge there. He was also a Shriner. He was joined Medina 19 in New York, and he kept his affiliation there. But for some reason, he had that Cold Creek Lodge in in Oklahoma was really special to him. And I've studied this man's career for many years. And after he became on the Supreme Court, as far as I can determine, the only organizational contact that he kept was with the Episcopal Church and with the Prince Hall Masons. So he was a remarkable man. And we ought to be very proud of the support that our lodge and its affiliated organizations gave to him. So those are my opening remarks. And I could talk for Thurgood Marshall a long time, but let me see what you brothers want to ask, or anybody else. I'll try to respond to the questions.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that, Brother Gibson. I just want to take a moment before I take this slide off the screen and just acknowledge the wonderful man and spirit and brother that Thurgood Marshall was to America, to Black America, and to Prince Hall Freemasonry. Man, I learned so much. Thank you so much for the wonderful work that you are doing. We're gonna, I guess, go move forward with panel questions. I wanted to acknowledge the fact that my grandfather, who's a member of Thurgood Marshall's other fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, he actually told me recently that I think I shared with you, Brother Gibson, I think we're supposed to be doing some research on this, that my grandfather was the standard bearer representing Alpha Phi Alpha at Thurgood Marshall's funeral, which I found out. So we got to see if we can find some video or photographs of that some type of way. But in any event, I guess I'll open up and then give it to Brother Jack and Brother Gillarm. Brother Gibson, what got you started in studying Thurgood Marshall this intensely? I mean, did you just wake up one morning? I mean, what?
Okay, I'll tell you precisely. First of all, Thurgood Marshall went on the Supreme Court in the same year. I guess I became a lawyer in the same year that he went on the Supreme Court in 1967. And so, of course, I was proud of that. He's a Baltimorean going on the Supreme Court. So there was a natural interest there. But then there was a precise event that occurred. In 1975, I was handling a legal matter in Baltimore City. And I wanted to get a Supreme Court stay of a proceeding that was taking place, a special order. And so I went to Justice Marshall to get the stay. Actually, I shouldn't have, because for the circuit, his circuit for emergency orders for the Second Circuit, I was in Baltimore, but I know that Chief Justice Berger wasn't going to sign my order, so I decided to go see Thurgood Marshall. He lived where his wife currently still lives, in Falls Church, Virginia, and my co-counsel and I just had trouble finding his house. We expect to get there earlier in the evening, but we didn't get to his home until just after 11 o'clock. And I'm standing in front of this man's house. I'm going to knock on the door of a Supreme Court justice at 11:10 or so. Well, we concluded that the worst that could happen, he can slam the door in our faces. So I did. First, the sons came to the door. Then we asked to speak to the father. Then he came in his bathrobe. The first thing that Thurgood Marshall ever said to me was, "Counselor, this had better be a criminal matter." To which I said, "No, Mr. Justice, it is not, but it is about Baltimore." That was a gamble. He said, "Okay, come on in." We dealt with the legal matter that I'd come there, for which I'd come there, in about 15 minutes. But we didn't get out of his house till after 2 o'clock in the morning. He talked. He asked us a few things about some people in Baltimore were they still living, and he was curious about whether certain buildings were still standing. But most of the time, he talked about growing up in Baltimore. I guess he had two young black lawyers in his home there, which he had been, for whatever the reason. He talked. And there were things I learned, observed even then about him that didn't match up with what I had been hearing, even of his positive attitude about Baltimore. So as I reflected over a couple of years about that encounter, I started interviewing people. I knew several of his relatives and some of his classmates and all. And at this point, I was not planning to write any book. I can tell you what I was doing. It was in a period of time, if you folks can't believe this, when the cassette recorder was out. I was fascinated with this fact that you could take a little machine about the size, a little small cassette recorder, not bigger than a cigarette, and record. Up until then, recording tape recorders were big things. Big reels were necessary. This had been invented, or at least become popularized, that you could do it, and popped in this thing called a cassette. It was new. So I was doing a lot of interviewing. So I did some of his relatives. But then there was another encounter with him. In 1985, the circuit court and the government here decided to rename our circuit court building in honor of Clarence Mitchell. Clarence Mitchell, who was the long-term NAACP lobbyist and Thurgood Marshall's good friend. While Marshall was the legal counsel, Clarence Mitchell was the Washington, D.C. principal lobbyist. Thurgood Marshall, Justice Marshall at that point, came over for the ceremony, and he remained for the luncheon that was held in the courthouse right after the ceremony. I came up to him and asked to take a photograph with him. He said yes, but for some reason it was taking the photographer a long time to snap the picture. It's just in his camera or something. Thurgood Marshall turns to me and says, "So what am I supposed to do? Kiss you?" So what am I supposed to do? Kiss you? Is the last thing Thurgood Marshall ever said to me. That was in 1985. And so the bookends are, the first thing is, "Counselor, this had better be a criminal matter." And the last thing was, "What am I supposed to do? Kiss you?" From that point on, I was hooked on Thurgood Marshall. I wanted to learn everything I could about him. Still, there being no intention of writing a book, because my artistic expression is primarily exhibits. I have exhibits all over the buildings, airport, my law school, Morgan, Coppin. I do graphic, historical exhibits. But what happened was this. When there were two surges of writing about Thurgood Marshall, books written about him and articles and things. When he retired, and of course, there was all this controversy about his replacement, Clarence Thomas, and then when he died. And in each of these books, that all added something significant to the literature, I would see things with which I disagreed, that I knew were wrong. But because I had interviewed so many people who knew him directly. And I would give speeches and I would comment. I would say so. So one day, the dean of my law school, one named Karen Rothenberg, came up to me and said, "Larry, I'm tired of hearing you complain that nobody but you understands Thurgood Marshall. Why don't you write the book and set the record straight?" That was in 2002. So I decided, okay, I'll do that. But it took me 10 years to do that because I couldn't rely on anybody's writing. I was a bad mouth to everybody. So I had to do all of my original research, everything. And that's what led to my first book, Young Thurgood. And what I discovered was where there really needed to be a development. No one had done even a reasonably good job about his early years. The latter years, particularly after Brown, lots of things written, and the other publications are okay, but there was no good book about his formative years. And that's what I wrote, really intending just that to be that. But then you hook on the guy, and then I've decided that there's now another phase that folks don't fully understand, and so this next book is about his main years of operating as counsel for the NAACP, a legal defense firm.
Gotcha. Brother Gillarm, Brother Jack.
I mean, this is amazing. And then, like going through our Grand Lodge proceedings, looking at Dobbs' Grand Master's address, and even X.L. Neal, and they talk about Thurgood Marshall. I don't know how many people knew this outside of the Atlanta area, but Thurgood Marshall was a member of Atlanta Consistent 24A. And I was just looking at, I was reading an excerpt from one of Grandmaster X.L. Neal's 1965 Grand Master's address.
Mm-hmm.
And in part it reads, some 15 brothers from my jurisdiction was present. I would like for them to stand. We have 4 active members from Georgia, Brother Walters, Thurgood Marshall, W.C. Kilpatrick, and himself. And then he goes on and another year he's asking everybody, like, how many of y'all know that Thurgood Marshall was a member of our jurisdiction? So and then Dobbs would talk about how much money, as you stated earlier, how much money that the Grand Lodge would give, and they definitely did make it a competition. And he would always say, hey, you know Georgia's on top. Georgia's gonna give it the most money. So these brothers all over just supported Thurgood Marshall. But I guess one of my questions is, out of all your studies of Thurgood Marshall, what was the most troubling thing or most passionate thing that Thurgood Marshall wanted to do? If he had, of all his cases, which one you think was probably the most important?
I understand the question. We know that his most famous case was Brown versus Board of Education. But when he was cornered and said, what do you consider to be your most important work? It was always the voting rights. He considered that his single most important case was Smith versus Allwright. This is 1944. This is 10 years before Brown. That's dealing with the white primary. And then there were subsequent litigations after that. And in fact, I think a lot now about present day. He would really be distressed about the current events around voting rights, because after he argued and succeeded in defending the constitutionality as the Solicitor General of the Voting Rights Act, he kind of thought that battle was won. He knew that we had lots of other struggles, but that was one that he thought was over. And of course, we are now being required to fight that battle again. But yes, he was most passionate, and he would explain it. Once you got the political power, you could affect education, housing, and all these other things. And so without a doubt, he would try to not answer the question, but a few times he slipped up and did, but I could tell even before he actually answered it, just by the way the internal correspondence and the voting rights was his number one.
Brother Gibson, definitely outstanding presentation. Brought together like a lot of things that I know that I was unaware of, but it also goes into me. What makes me proud is to see how, the platform, he used his platform, and the brothers within Prince Hall Masonry use the platform to help push forward, the needs of our people when it comes to social activism. And so when you look at the things that he did, and the fact that, past Grandmaster Amos T. Hall, basically, told him, look, you come into the order and we'll be able to help you more coming into the order and receiving the help that he did. And looking at, like you was talking about, today's uh, situations and how he would be distressed on, what is going on. A lot of times, today, when we talk about certain things that are going on as social activism, a lot of times it's now looked at as being politics. And so, we have, a lot of brothers who will say, well, we don't discuss politics, so on and so forth. And so we have a tendency to have to show, like, historically, look, social activism is not politics. So how do you think, with you saying he would be distressed with the climate and the, looking at voters' rights and things, things like that? Um, do you feel like the same type of help that he received, um, back in the day from past Grandmaster Dobbs and Hall and stuff like that, he would get in today's era?
There's no question in my mind that he would be urging the craft to be very much engaged in this empowerment issue regarding voting rights. I have no doubt about it. I'm hoping that we do, and that we do so in a way that makes it clear to people that voting is easy now. Now, all these stuff that they are trying to do, let's have that backfire by organizing our folks. So no, he understood this political thing, and part of it is I've been thinking for about the last 4 years about why was it just money? Was it just that he, of all the organizations that he could have been a member, and I've concluded that it's not. I mean, I don't know if your brothers have had a chance to read a piece that I wrote a couple of years called "America's Oldest Civil Rights Organization," the Prince Hall Masons. You could just be Google. If you just Google America's Oldest Civil Rights Organization, the Prince Hall Masons, really what it was I don't remember whether it was a Prince Hall Day or a Black History Month speech that I gave, and then I converted it into an article, put it in the Afro-American newspaper. But it pops up easily. If you just Google America's Oldest Civil Rights Organization, it'll pop up. And what it documents, what you guys have been talking about for some time, this historical mission of this organization in empowerment. I mean, it's I don't have to tell you, it's the oldest Black continuous organization of any sort in the United States. And so therefore, but it's also was one that from the very beginning was fighting for empowerment, all the way back to that time when Prince Hall and those original members of the lodge started petitioning the Massachusetts legislature to abolish slavery, then petitioning and bugging them to create schools for African Americans. And I in this article, I just traced this continuous involvement in empowerment of our people through and you guys have written about the involvement in the Underground Railroad and the whole abolitionist of movement. I've learned so much about this out west from Brother Morgan's book. I mean, that is Lost Empire is it's quite a book, and well, I mean, that's important history, and it's about empowerment. Now, talking about this book here, then, but there are other publications. This has been a continuous mission of this organization. I mentioned earlier in my comments the passage of the 15th Amendment. The biggest celebration for that was in Baltimore in the May the 17th, 1870. We had planned a massive reenactment in period costume of that event, but it had to be canceled on account of the pandemic. But the website, voting rights celebration is still.com is still up, and it has a lot of information. And the leaders of that celebration were Prince Hall Mason. The principal organizer was a grand master. So we get through, through the Civil War, of course. You guys have talked about the Masonic leaders, not only through the abolitionist period and the Underground Railroad, but actually in the military. Brother Morgan's book talks much about the Western military lodges and the highest ranking soldier, black in the military. With not Brother Hayden, got his name clearly. Tell me. Hayden was the recruited. I'll tell you in a minute. But
talking about Matthews?
Huh?
Are you talking about Matthews?
No, boy. I'll tell you in a minute who he is. The highest ranking black in the whole U.S. colored troops.
Martin Delaney?
Yeah, Martin Delaney. But so there is from this. There's been a continuum. So if there was one organization that it's logical that Thurgood Marshall would have been a member of, that was in its history, in its DNA, the work of liberation and it would be this lodge, and so it got started in Oklahoma, but it was just a natural. I mean, but I trace this history, and again, you can go and Google and find this. It's America's oldest civil rights organization, Prince Hall Masons.
Awesome, and we put links to that as well as to your Young Thurgood book into the chat, as well as if anyone's interested in a copy of The Lost Empire as well. Although we've talked about my book quite a bit, in previous episodes, of course. Make sure you all go check out our archive of episodes as well. Before we go on to the viewer questions, I do want to just thank you so much, Brother Gibson, for coming on here to talk with us tonight. This is my first year as a graduate student and as an assistant instructor at Morgan State University, and so I want to thank you also for helping me along in that process, and for your words of encouragement and wisdom as I journey into being a university instructor now. I'm standing on the shoulders of some giants here, and you're definitely one of them.
You will enjoy that. Being a professor is the closest thing to being immortal, in the sense that your impact just continues and continues, and you don't know where it ends. And as for, I've been a law professor for 50 years. I'm simply delighted just watching the careers of my students. But I want to mention one other book.
Yes,
I got one other shout out. Oklahoma. I learned so much detail about that from Brother Darrell Hodge. His book, Cemented with Love. It's a history of the Oklahoma Prince Hall Masons, but it has an awful lot of this history. You've got it also. Okay.
Right here.
Good. Well, we're this is quite a publication. So
absolutely, and we're going to make sure that we that we make sure that link is available as well. And of course, for the longtime viewers know Brother Hodge is no stranger to the Prince Hall Think Tank. I'm actually looking forward to seeing him on this coming Wednesday while I'm out there in Oklahoma as well. Like I said before, we're going to jump into viewer questions. But Brother Jack, Brother Gillum, did you have anything else before we move forward? No.
No, I'm good. I'm soaking it all in, man. This is wonderful.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I have one last panel question, and we'll go to this. Is there what can for a brother or sister who is out there somewhere? It could be in Ohio, it could be California, it could be wherever, and they're saying, well, I was looking through the minutes, and I went through an old box, and I found a photograph, and it said Thurgood Marshall came and spoke at my lodge, came and spoke at my church or what have you. I wonder if Brother Gibson knows about this. How can they get that information to you in time, maybe being your next book or maybe even your third book?
I would be delighted. Please email it to me or phone it or text it to me. I don't know. I mean, should I? Let me think of which email I want to use, because this is nationwide.
Right. Well, while you're thinking about that, you want to go to viewer questions?
Yeah.
What do you think on that one? All right, very good. So our first question, actually, I thought was an interesting one from CWH. I'm not sure if it's a man or a woman, but CWH is asking if you know of any connection between Thurgood Marshall and W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yes. When Thurgood first came up to New York, this was there was a period of time when Thurgood, with W.B. Du Bois and Walter Wright, who was running the NAACP, kind of had a falling out. And Du Bois was in there and out, but not much of a relationship, mainly because even when Du Bois was in his office during this period of time, he was hardly talking to not just Thurgood, but hardly anybody else. There was a little a friction that had developed, and it ultimately was Du Bois leaving, and within 2 years of Marshall's being in New York, Roy Wilkins had taken over what was Du Bois's principal function, which was the publication of the Crisis magazine. And so they had a little bit of an overlap, but not much of much interaction in the office there. Okay. And Thurgood never talked a lot about Du Bois in terms of a close relationship. I mean, he would make some comments about what he thought was a stiffness about Du Bois, a kind of super formal, but I think it had more to do with the friction between Du Bois and Walter White, that Du Bois was withdrawing from the NAACP at that time.
Gotcha. Brother C.J. Raymond, he said this is a great presentation, and he wants to know: do you know what in your belief, in your research, what is it that inspired Thurgood Marshall to become a lawyer in the first place?
Well, that's a good question, because it's one of the myths that I had to debunk. Some of the myths, by the way, about Marshall, he spawned, and he was quite a raconteur. And sometimes I not let the facts get in the way of a good story. But here is the value, which you guys already know, of original research. The conventional wisdom for many years in books, actually, was that Thurgood Marshall, mother wanted him, and he planned to be a dentist. In some writings, it's even further. Supposedly that what changed that is that he got into a unpleasant relationship with a chemistry professor at Lincoln, where he was undergrad. He flunked a chemistry, and that sort of led to a change. Well, that's not true at all. I was able to get Thurgood Marshall's file from Lincoln, there's a long story as to how that happened, because the building was shut up. They were removing asbestos, and the contractor had said nobody could go in there for 2 years. But I finally was able to work through some board members, and they went in and got the file. They went in with all this hazmat suits and stuff. And in the file there is his application to Lincoln University. And the last question is, what is your career objective? Something like that. And he says explicitly, to be a lawyer. No one knew that until I found that file. And I, therefore, in my first book, published a whole application. The family gave me permission to publish his entire academic record. Conventional wisdom was that he was not a good student. He was kind of like a late bloomer. Not true at all. In my book, I have his entire academic record from high school through college, through law school, every grade. And he was always a top student. But he would talk about how he didn't study and how what a goofball he was. He was not at all. That some of that was his own puffery. In fact, this was something about Lincoln, and even a little bit Morehouse, but most of the Lincoln guys, those older guys who loved to brag about how little they studied. And I think that I don't believe it at all. I forgot what the question was. What was the original question?
What inspired him to be a lawyer?
Oh, okay. When you look at his academic record, first of all, be clear what was his passion. His passion was debating. Mm-hmm. From high school, from the 9th grade of high school, the only really extracurricular activity that he really liked was high school. He goes to Lincoln. Back then, debating was highly competitive. It took 2 months before them to select the team because there were rounds of competition. And most students got on there was a freshman team and there was a sophomore. He was the first freshman to ever make the varsity team. Look at his courses. He took courses in rhetoric and logic and foreign languages. He was preparing himself to be an advocate. He may not have known what he was going to be an advocate for or exactly how he was going to do it, but his entire high school and academic years show someone who that's what he is interested in. And so I think it came quite naturally for him.
Got you. Very good. Thank you for that. We have brother. Let me see. Brother Taquan Jamerson. I believe I met this brother a few months back. He wants to note that he actually teaches at Thurgood Marshall Elementary,
all right,
in Philadelphia. This brother came up to me. I was at the Jurisdiction of Pennsylvania's annual communication back in October, and he's been watching the show for quite some time. So we'll definitely give him a shout out. And I hope, I don't know if you have, if this is in your book, but I don't know if you're going to be compiling, how many Thurgood Marshall schools and.
That's what I need to update. It was 37 as of the time of the first book. So I'm going to need to now update that. Okay. I don't remember whether that school was listed in there, but I actually listed them in my original book proposal.
Okay.
So thanks for reminding me of that. Thank you.
No problem. Sister Darnisha Pickett, she wants to know, could you discuss the complicated relationship between Brother Thurgood Marshall and J. Edgar Hoover?
Right, sure.
Who also happened to be a Mason, although he was not a Prince Hall Mason.
During the 30s, there was a big pull and tug between some of the black leaders, many of them, and communists. Who there was an aggressive effort to infiltrate black organizations, Masons. The NAACP, lots of organizations of that sort. And I have a chapter in my book about in the early years when he's practicing here. I think I call it black and white and red all over, something along those. So there was this great caution on the part of Thurgood and Walter Wright and Roy Wilkins back then to be not involved. They thought that the Reds, as they called them back then, yes, did support the various um, civil rights measures and equality planks, but that they were essentially using black folks. Their principal objective was an international one, and that black folks were pawns. It begins with the Scottsboro. That's where this tension between black lawyers and white lawyers begins, with the Scottsboro case, where essentially the communists lawyers got control of that case away from the NAACP, to some extent to the NAACP's fault, because they were not initially clearly and aggressive enough, and the family went along with them. So the big criminal case, black criminal case of that period, ends up being handled by white lawyers. And after that, the NAACP paid much more attention to this to those issues, but there was throughout the 40s and into the 50s this pull and tug between the NAACP, the Herbaligs, and black leaders, and communist folks were big. Now, that word communist has a funny meaning. It meant I'm not talking about the 40s. This begins in the 30s. In the 30s, it was kind of just another party, but it had this international connection and agenda. And so, yes, there's no question that the Thurgood Marshall and other black leaders worked together, I guess, in some sense, to prevent what they thought, what the black leaders thought was a threat to their organization.
Awesome.
And they're fascinating books about it. I mean, it went on, for a while.
Awesome. Well, we're getting flooded with questions. I don't think we have time to answer them all. However, we will have you to drop, whatever website or email address you'd like people to contact you at.
I have the best way to reach me the easiest. I have a Facebook.
Okay.
It's I think it's Larry Gibson 98, but you'll see my picture there. Facebook message is something that I pay attention to. Any of the message that I get through that's one that's easy to reach, and most people have. So that's what I would recommend as an initial. Then I'll get back in touch, and then often people initially contact me that way, but I then follow up in a different way. Has an hour and a half gone this fast?
We're approaching that time.
Oh my Lord! But you're having fun.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Brother Gibson, we're gonna move into closing thoughts. I just want to say to you,
I got a bragging before we go. Can you share my screen?
Sure.
Okay, this is my bragging screen. The top image is Thurgood Marshall with the head of the Scottish Rite and the South and the Northern jurisdiction. The Southern jurisdiction at that time was Willard Allen. The Northern jurisdiction was George Crawford. And the bottom picture is me with the guys who occupy those positions now. Corey Hawkins of the Southern jurisdiction, and Melvin Baysmore of the Northern jurisdiction. Isn't that a cool picture?
Hey.
All right. You can stop sharing.
Beautiful.
History repeats itself. And on that note, Brother Gibson, I just want to thank you so much. I think that one of the hallmarks of a good historian, when it comes to when you have a passion such as chronicling the life of someone like Thurgood Marshall, is you're not just a historian or researcher, but you also end up becoming a steward of that person's legacy. And I think that not only in your research on Brother Marshall, but also in your own legal work, your own professional career onto itself. You are definitely a steward, and in many ways a son or a nephew, however you would like to put it, of Thurgood Marshall. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you're doing. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of us here at the Prince Hall Think Tank when we say we honor you and we appreciate you for your time and for joining us tonight. Brother Jack.
Absolutely. Brother Gibson, it has been an absolute honor and pleasure just to hear you speak on the life and legacy of illustrious Marshall. There's so many things that I take away from this, and just the work that you put in to put this together has been outstanding. So thank you for your time and your efforts. And I know the jurisdiction of Maryland is lucky, blessed. Excuse me. Let me rephrase that. Blessed to have someone like you in their midst. So thank you so much to the audience, the Prince Hall Think Tank. As always, we thank you for giving us the most precious gift that you can ever give us, which is your time, because time is something that you can never get back. So we thank you for your time, for being with us this evening. And if there's one thing that you take away from this evening, and hopefully that you take away from the many episodes that we have done from the Prince Hall Think Tank, is that the use of your platform. If you haven't learned anything about what Thurgood Marshall did, he used his platform to make change. Past Grandmaster Amos T. Hall, encouraged him to come into the order, to use the platform of the order in order to make change. We hope that as panelists of the Prince Hall Think Tank, we use this platform to educate you, to enlighten you, so that you can continue to make change, not just in yourselves, but to those around you. And so we hope that you continue to use your platform. So thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you next month. And although, Dave Gillarm came on with, something positive as far as the Knicks being being a Knicks fan, my mom is a big Walt Frazier fan. But in the words of Stephen A. Smith, the you had one Knick who won the worst dunk contest in the history of the NBA. So it's not really something to brag about this month, sir. Let's look for. Hopefully, we can look forward to next month, and hopefully, we can get something a little better. But until then, thank you so much.
Oh, how am I going to follow that up? A win is a win. So it doesn't matter if it was the worst contest or the best. We won it, and that's all that matters. But Brother Gibson, definitely thank you for coming on the show and taking your time out to do it. It's not too often that we get to meet somebody that actually had a conversation with some of our civil rights legends, and not only did you have a conversation, but you was in the man's home. So, thank you for everything you've done, everything you're going to continue to do for us. And that just can't be understated. Just thank you for everything. As always, it's a great show. Great to be back with you all. If for some of you all, like Damien and Jack, did understand the connection with Walt Frazier. Walt Frazier went to college here, Southern Illinois. So that's why I'm wearing the sweater as well. So it was always a connection here between the two. So I'm always going to represent New York, the Knicks, in some way, shape, or form. Well, as always, just thank you all for tuning in, supporting us, and we truly appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you next month.
I want to thank you guys, first of all, for the work that you've been doing for years and the education that you provide to us. And thank you very much for honoring me by allowing me to participate today. Thank you.
Absolutely, Brother Gibson. Thank you. And I'm gonna let you know right now. Next time, which I drive past BWI Airport every day when I go driving to Morgan State, and I'm flying out of there this week. Shout out to the Grand Lodge and the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Oklahoma, both of them, because they'll be hosting me for a book talk this week in Oklahoma City. But when I get to BWI Airport, I'm gonna walk through just with my chest gonna be a little bit more poked out. My head's gonna be
Go
smooth.
see the exhibit. Go see the exhibit.
I've seen it, but I'm gonna go see it again, and I'm gonna let them know that I know the man who put it there. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna let them know. I'm gonna be a little more straight because I'm gonna know that not only am I there honoring Thurgood Marshall, but also honoring yourself. And with that being said, I guess we'll end this show as we always do, as Brother Kathy would have us to do. Brothers and sisters, thank you for tuning into the Prince Hall Think Tank. Let's make sure we teach Freemasonry in our lodges. Thank you. Have a good night. See you next month. Be blessed.